The title of this presentation is Economic and Societal Impact of Recreational Activities, Guntersville Lake in Alabama. I'm Benjamin Boozer from the College of Business and Industry at Jacksonville State University in Jacksonville, Alabama. The abstract for this research discusses the differences in economic impact and societal impact. And what we're doing in this presentation is we're considering how there's a relationship between economic impact in measuring economic variables and societal impact, which looks at a larger, more comprehensive metric. We're going to consider a lake in Alabama, Guntersville Lake, and how economic impact can be measured from that, but we're going to apply a measure that we develop called Societal Impact Index, and we're applying that from the UN Human Development Index metric that is for country level, and what we're looking at is in a county level. The model examines relationships between economic impact and societal impact, and it uses these county level data to draw conclusions. There's a lot of economic activity associated with water activity, with water recreation and global leisure type activity. There's been many economic development initiatives put forth to use freshwater natural resources to increase economic development. And so what we're considering here is how this can be approached from not only the standpoint of economic impact, but this wider societal impact. There's been research done on this already in looking at these measures, and what we will do is we will take this to a step further from only looking at how the spending affects the economic part of the equation, to take it forth and consider how spending produces that larger societal impact. Now, in the literature review, there's three main areas that we found. Again, considering the economic dimensions, and these dimensions are looking at how stakeholders interact for planning purposes, and you have various social networks and the dynamic impact of these relationships between and among the various stakeholders. Now, the other part is measuring cause and effect of these land use areas, and a lot of this goes back to the 1950s, where there was some ideas discussed about community cohesion, individual well-being, satisfaction, these type things that we're looking at today with societal impact that were brought forth back in the 1950s. But so much of the research focused on the economic benefits, and that's what we're considering as input-output, where various resources are put forth, and then what are you generating from that? And the biggest reason for that is because of this type of research. It's easier to measure when you're saying, okay, I've invested this much money, and what type of return are we getting, are we receiving? And so that's what the input-output. So societal impact takes that a little further. So the research hasn't really hasn't gone in the direction of trying to capture that societal impact as much as it has the economic impact. We're using this United Nations Human Development Index as a metric, but we're modifying it, and you'll see that in the methodology. We're modifying it to measure these effects at the county level. Now, in the methodology, the model again is looking at economic impact and societal impact. And when we look at economic impact, we can really look at this from the aspect of going from the most comprehensive to the most narrow, most narrowly defined. So when you're considering economic activity, that's just the dollars that are spent in an area that's attributable to any industry or event or a policy. The economic contribution or effect, these are gross changes in economic activity. So if you bring in some type of business then what will happen is you will experience a gross change in economic activity from that. But economic impact is more narrowly defining that, and it's looking at net changes. So with economic impact, you're seeing this again, the input-output part, where what did your input, what did it produce in terms of output? And this again is a way to measure the use of resources to quantify if each dollar spent in input, is it producing a return? So, and this is one reason economic impact is such a big component of these type models. Different types of effect: direct, indirect, and induced. That again, that's a way of defining the economic impact. If it's direct, it's initially when it happens, when the spending occurs. If it's indirect, that's where you'll have these supplying industries that are producing an effect. And induced effect are just increased household spending from payroll. Now, the other part, that's economic impact. The other part, societal impact. Again, this is looking at it at the county level. And here we're using some areas: length of life, knowledge, and standard of living. And we're basing this upon the metrics that were used in this Human Development Index that's put forth by the United Nations. Now, the measure that we developed is Societal Impact Index, SII. And the definition for that is looking at the life potential metric multiplied by high school completion rates multiplied by per capita real GDP metric. And the way those are defined, and you'll see how these are defined, and these are based in part upon this Human Development Index. So the life potential metric is looking at the potential years of life lost. So in other words, what this is saying is if a area, a county, has a higher societal impact index, then they should have less life lost. In other words, they should have people living longer based upon their expected life expectancy. They should be reaching that life expectancy. High school completion, this is just looking at the number of individuals that completed high school. Per capita real GDP metric is looking at real GDP by county and dividing it by the population of the county multiplied by a Gini coefficient. And that Gini coefficient is just a measure of income inequality, where smaller values represent more equality, and higher values, like a smaller value approaching 0, represents more equality, and those values approaching 1 represent more inequality. And so what we're seeing here is if you have more inequality, then this is producing, making this denominator larger, and of course making this metric smaller. Again, we're looking at these, the way each of these metrics is established. The higher number is better because it's producing more societal impact. The periods of analysis, we're looking at 2013, 2018, and 2023 for Guntersville Lake in Alabama, counties of Marshall and Jackson County, and then the regional areas, these regional counties of Blount, Cullman, DeKalb, Madison, and Morgan, as well as the entire state of Alabama. Now, this graph, this table, what it shows is economic activity by these various areas. The intent of showing this is to show that their economic activity can be quantified, and we're quantifying it by the two lake counties of Jackson and Marshall, and we're also quantifying it by these various regions. But what I want to do is show how we can use the spending that we included to find this economic activity, to define how these lake counties produce economic activity, either from the fiscal impact or from lakefront property values, fishing and visitors, residents' contributions just from living there, household spending, boat sales, employment, operations of the dam. All of these go into the economic activity, so all of these can be quantified. In this figure, what we see here, this table, we're looking at this in terms of human development trends. Now, remember that the human life lost is part of the societal impact index that we discussed. These values represent the years of potential life loss for Jackson and Marshall counties for 2013, 2018, and 2023. These are the high school graduation percentages as well as the gross domestic product. So all of these values will go into the societal impact index. What these represent, these are categorical spending within the different geographies. In other words, these spending areas were exactly the same spending categories that were used in finding economic impact. So what the intent of this is to show that yes, that there is a relationship between economic impact and societal impact. So each of these spending areas, whether it's from docking and landing for boats, camp fees, payments on boats and trailers and campers, rental of boats, exercise equipment, bicycles, camping equipment, hunting and fishing equipment, all of these various types of recreational equipment represent different spending categories that were used for the economic impact area. Now, what I did is notice the spending averages. So you have spending averages of the Marshall and Jackson counties, which is where the lake is, of $10.91, okay, per person. And then for Blount, Cullman, DeKalb, Madison, and Morgan County of $11.73, and then for the state of Alabama, $11.23 for these particular spending categories. So in this case, what you see is higher spending for the counties surrounding the lake, not necessarily the counties where the lake is located. Then we looked at standard deviation, and we saw the standard deviation is higher. And when we looked at coefficient of variation, which is taken into consideration the spending average, then we see that the Marshall and Jackson has a higher coefficient of variation. So that's showing more risk here. Okay, that's what that measure shows. Now, what this shows is as we examine this, we have the societal impact. Okay, and this is the metric that we discussed earlier, life potential metric times times high school completion times per capita real GDP metric. And you'll see from this societal impact, you're finding the highest societal impact in Blount, Cullman, DeKalb, Madison, and Morgan counties. The categorical spending is also highest there, okay? And then the societal impact per spending dollar, though, we see that is going to be higher in Marshall and Jackson. But then when we come down and we look at considering risk, then we see that risk, even though that this is higher, societal impact per spending dollar is higher in Marshall and Jackson, it is not, when you take into consideration risk, then the risk shows a smaller metric. So this conclusion, what we found is, yes, there is a relationship between economic impact and societal impact, and this can be measured on the county level. But once we introduce risk into this model, then we see that the idea of societal impact is not necessarily, it's more inconclusive, because without risk, we see that we are producing more societal impact, but the risk that we have, in other words, the standard deviation, the coefficient of variation, those metrics are showing the risk, which is variability. And since those are higher, those metrics are higher for risk, then this is showing that yes, even though we produce a higher level of societal impact in the counties where the lake is associated, where the lake exists, it does not extend further once you include risk in that profile.